Last week I was fortunate enough, together with my sister and brother-in-law, to spend some days at Glacier National Park. One of the most beautiful places you'll ever find. We stayed in a cabin in the mountains right outside the park. And the first night, we were sitting there, and Judy said to me, "Herb, when was the last time you can remember being in a place where you had absolutely no cell tower reception, no Wi-Fi, no television?" And I had to stop and think. It had been a long time. Now, amazingly, we survived. And we're not a bunch of teenagers. We're all over 70. And yet, we're so locked in, almost tethered to those ways of communicating that you feel lost when you don't have it. And I'm not one who's always online, and I'm not always texting. But when you don't have it, you discover that these are, in many ways, intrusions in our life. Good ones, and very necessary in many, many ways. But nonetheless, they prevent us from ever really getting away. Now, Jesus did not have that problem of being online or people texting him all day long. He had probably a bigger problem. He had the crowds following him. And if you listen to the gospel today, two parts, and they seem to be opposite, but they really are connected. The first part is where Jesus says to his apostles, "Let's get away by ourselves for a while. Let's have some rest." Now, I think you have to really be careful not to misinterpret this. Jesus was not being self-centered or saying, "Let's have a me day and just take care of our own psychological needs." I think what was happening is he's saying, we need to reflect on what's going on. The setting, of course, is this is right after last week's gospel passage where Jesus had sent out the apostles 2 by 2, and they'd gone to all these villages and come back. So he was basically saying, let's get away by ourselves, have some time for reflection. Let's do some debriefing. And I want you to have time to reflect on and get to know how God has been active in your lives. You see, we do a lot of things. We're all busy. Everybody's busy. By the way, busy is not a virtue. I've read the list of virtues many times, and busy is not on the list. But we are busy, and sometimes we're busy doing very good things. But the other half of that is you have to reflect on what's going on to know how God is working in your life. That's really missing for most of us. And Jesus was aware of that for the apostles. So he said, let's get away. Now, here's the amazing thing. That's the first part of the gospel. Let's go away by ourselves. The second part of the gospel is where, by the time they get there, the crowd's already there. I love that. They took the boat, the crowd went on foot, and they got there first. The crowd was already there. And even though they had tried to get away, Jesus says, they're like sheep without a shepherd. His heart was moved with pity, the passage says. He had empathy. He felt for them. He knew that they really needed something. And so even though they had the desire to be reflective, he put it into action and did something about it. Now, this is a setup for next week's gospel. Next week is the very center of all the scripture readings of the entire summer, because next week we jump to John's gospel, where we talk about the multiplication of loaves and fish in this deserted place. It's the same account, but in John instead of Mark. And then the rest of the summer we reflect on Jesus feeding the crowd. So this is preparing for next week. So be sure to tune in next week for what's going to happen. But for this week, we realize that Jesus was moved, and he cared about them so much that he even put his own agenda on the back burner. Now, what does empathy really mean? We say Jesus was empathetic. He felt for them. He felt with them. He was able to enter their experience. The word empathy, em, means into their hearts, into their lives. He was understanding of what was going on. I've known some people who are empathetic by nature. They're wonderful people. But for all the rest of us, we have to work at it. We have to learn how to be empathetic. It means that we have to truly listen, and not just to words, but to listen to the message behind the words. We have to know what's going on in other people's hearts and minds and lives. Not be busybodies, but somehow allow their concerns and needs to flow over into ours. And so we pay more attention to them than to ourselves. And here's the amazing thing. These two parts of this gospel really are connected, because for us to become empathetic, we have to have the heart of Jesus. And how are we going to have the heart of Jesus? Unless we spend time with the Lord. So yes, once in a while we do have to get away. We do have to turn off all those connections in our lives. And we have to say, God, how are you working in us and through us? And once we do that, then our hearts will be more like the Lord's, and we will be more sensitive to other people. But wait, there's a third part. We not only feel with others, we respond. We do something. I was talking to a woman who was telling a story about her own family. And she and her husband, a few years back, had decided to become foster parents. And they had a little child. And the child had some special needs. And he was only about 3 years old at that time. And the agency decided that there was no way to reunite him with his own biological parents for whatever reason. So they looked to other family relatives who would like to take this wonderful little boy. And all of the family said, no, we don't want him, or we can't take him, whatever it was. And her comment was, but I want him. So that's when she and her husband became adoptive parents. And I met him at the age of 11, and he is so much part of that family, growing up beautifully. That woman had the empathy that was so strong. She felt what the child was going through, but she had the ability to take that empathy and feeling and put it into action. That's what we're called to be. And if we're called to be shepherds, it's more than just having an attitude towards other people. It's commitment to the people who are in need. So we take time to reflect and discover how God is part of our life and what the Lord is calling us to be. We have hearts of empathy because we spend time with the Lord, and then that empathy comes into commitment and action. That's what the gospel is about today, and that's the call to discipleship.